Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Friday Finish. We made it to the end of another week, so thank God it's Friday, right? Today, for the Friday Finish, we have a very, very special guest, Beth McGovern. She's a registered nurse, the clinical liaison and director of marketing over at CareOne Wall. And last night, we shared the most incredible experience. Beth and I co-hosted an event at Fulfill. And if you don't know what Fulfill is, it's the food bank of Monmouth and Ocean counties. And they feed hundreds of thousands of meals every year to people in our local communities within Monmouth and Ocean County. And last night we spent a good 2 hours making, what was it, 504
crisis weekend backpack crisis meals.
Yeah, crisis meals for school children in Monmouth and Ocean counties. And, as we're all standing there on the assembly line, putting them together, it struck us all that this is potentially all that a kid could go home with for the weekend. And it was really disturbing because we had a station where they got milk, and then it was a little can of SpaghettiOs, and then they got a tuna and a chicken salad, like those little packs you buy with the crackers in the tuna fish aisle. And then they got 2 applesauces and 2 oatmeals. I think I got everything.
Yes.
And that's what they go home with for the weekend. And the fact that we only did 504, and that's a drop in the bucket. And it was just like, wow. And then Beth started talking about this story she heard about in, was it Long Branch?
It was a young girl in the Long Branch school during the virtual class. She just burst out hysterical crying, and they were like, "What's the matter?" And she had said, "I'm starving to death." She said, "I'm starving to death." And she's like, "I'm so hungry." And it went viral. Everyone from all over the place just didn't know what to do, because from the outside, you really can't tell. And the bravery, I just keep constantly thinking about the bravery of this child to speak up. And because of her, not only did she help her own family, but she helped 98 other families were captured in Long Branch community alone, which is a small little corner of our world. 98 other families are being helped by Fulfill in particular with this food insecurity because of her bravery. If she hadn't spoken out, but also, thank God for the teacher who went into handle it mode and didn't ignore her and went and got her help.
And took it seriously. And the fact that the folks, the experts at Fulfill, were able to put it together, get her family a crisis box. And not only that, they're helping almost 100 other families right around the corner from where we all are. And that's just
regularly, on a regular basis.
That's amazing. And they said their needs have quadrupled and tripled since COVID, because so many people are out of work, their job has dried up, or they're home with their children because schools are not back full time yet. It was a very sobering night. I know you and I were walking through, back to the sorting room, and just the towers of pallets of food and donations is awe-inspiring, because it reaches to the ceiling and it's 20 feet high.
Yeah, it is. It's like Sam's Club and Costco had a baby, and this is the magnitude. And that's the thing, it's about magnitude. So another statistic that we learned is 1 in 6 families lives with food insecurity, and there was 14 of us in a room. So that, numbers wise works out to 2 people. But what also struck us too is we work in an industry where we have people that make minimum wage and we have people that make 6 figures. And the people among us who, if someone in their family has COVID, or somebody's, and unexpectedly out on maternity leave sooner or something, that puts them into to food insecurity. And food insecurity, that's a word that's thrown around a lot right now. And what that truly means is you don't know where your next 2 meals are coming from. Food insecurity is the next 2 meals. So that's like, we just had lunch, but you don't know if you're going to have dinner or breakfast. And that is like now, that is urgent. And
It's
so,
so frightening and
yeah,
so incredibly sobering.
humbling, very humbling.
It truly is. And you made that point. Two of us in that room are in that boat and we don't know it.
Right. And nobody speaks about it. And it has like a shamefulness to it, or it hasn't happened to us yet, but it could. You know, there are many of us who are, you know, single parents. There are many of us who have been recently divorced, or, you know, an
One
ankle
paycheck
break.
away from catastrophe.
Right. And that's many Americans are one paycheck away from catastrophe on a daily basis. And it's not really discussed enough, but thank God for places like Fulfill. And what was so wonderful about Fulfill is while they have a steady stream of people that they help, there are temporary. This can be a temporary situation. It is something to help in the interim. They do have a whole resource department to help people further.
That was wonderful. It's not just here's the food, but it's here's your food. How can we help lift you up?
What can we do for you? Yeah.
It was, I was this close to crying.
Yeah, it's very emotional because we do take so much for granted. Oh, sorry.
It was empowering. And, you know, one of the reasons we were there is because they have a new program, their hospital feeding program, where, you know, it dovetailed so nicely because March is Nutrition Month. And they have this new program where they're providing 1,400 meals weekly to folks who are chronically ill, tragically ill. You know, you get COVID and you're out of work, or cancer, God forbid, anything like that. And they'll send you home with a box of food from Fulfill to make sure you have good nutrition and you have at least that burden is taken off of you when you come home from the hospital. Because everybody knows when you come home from the hospital, you're doggone tired and, you know, you've just had this trial of an experience and you're not in the mood to go to the grocery store, or you probably physically can't even get there. So they send you home with a box and, you know, it gets you on your feet. And they've done, since the program began in November, I was astounded. They've done 15,000 meals in November, when it launched in November, December, January, February, mid-March. That's like 5.5 months. That's crazy. That tells you how many very ill people just in this Monmouth County area. And, you know, I know part of your expertise is nutrition. So I was hoping you could share some information about how important nutrition is for health and healing after illness or surgery or what have you.
Well, in so many ways, but back to those numbers for a second. Let us just, I want to crunch those numbers a little bit. So 15,000, that does not mean 15,000, you know, people. That means 3,000 people were given meals for 4 days. That's how many meals it takes to feed 3,000 people for 4 days. Yes. So in the event of a hospital discharge, if you have a person who's living with chronic COPD or chronic congestive heart failure. So COPD is congestive, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. They are short of breath. Mm-hmm. They are oxygen dependent. They are weak. Usually they can't tolerate the activity of, selecting things off of a shelf, putting in a cart and walking to the cashier, paying for it, carrying it. All of those activities are not possible for someone with COPD.
No.
COPD is very similar. Renal disease, people who are going to and from dialysis, they're in dialysis sometimes 3 days a week. Do you honestly think they're going to a grocery store on one of those days that they're not in dialysis? The answer is no. So no. Programs like this are vital and most important. Healing begins with the food you consume. Fact of matter. The work of healing requires calories, protein, fats, carbohydrates, vitamins, nutrients, minerals. It requires all of that. Sepsis is the worst possible infection. It's a fatal infection. People who are malnourished are at increased risk of sepsis. Like I said before, the elderly are the most difficult to assess for malnutrition because they don't want to admit they're not eating right. And they don't even know they're not eating right because their requirements, their signals in their brain for hunger and thirst have changed. So in the home, 65 people of 65 and over, 65 years and over, 2 to 16% who walk in off the street to go to the hospital, maybe they fell, maybe they had a dizzy episode, something to this minute magnitude. They go into the emergency room and blood work is run, and we find out between 2 and 16% of regular people 65 and over are malnourished. Now, when we think about vitamin deficiencies like A, E, D, these are very important vitamins for cancer protection, for inflammation. These are extremely vital vitamins. When we're talking about vitamin deficiency, malnutrition, we are talking 35% of Americans 65 and over are malnourished. That blew my mind. You think about, we're in a land of abundance. We can, how is this happening? And it's happening. So, I mean, aren't those numbers shocking to you, Vicki? I mean,
it is. And I just think back to my mom. She was that COPD, CHF patient. And I know it didn't strike me until what you just said. The brain changes at 65 and older, like the taste change. I know her caregiver went through a spell where for 3 months straight, all the woman ate for lunch was a blueberry pancake. Now, that's not the most balanced lunch I've ever seen in my life. Yeah. So it's just like, yeah, I know she took a multivitamin, but that probably wasn't enough.
Right. Yeah. And the food that the nutrients that stay with you do come from food. The nutrients that stay with you do come from liquids. So liquid supplements, are definitely better than the oral, the pill form. Also, because most of the pill form leave our bodies. The other thing that is very concerning as a clinician, if you see, I run into many times 70, 80, 90-year-old patients who they want to eat, but they probably have a handful of pills that they consume 2 to 3 times a day. Some of them cause nausea, some of them cause bitter tastes in their mouth. So the food that they consume is minimal because of all of that. And most medications they do need, they're life-sustaining medications. However, because of the gastric emptying, because of the metabolic requirements, they're still digesting all of that medication. There's no room for food. There's no room for fluid.
That just struck me. You made such a good point. That handful of pills, because chances are older folks don't have the appetite that we did in our 40s and 30s. We can't sit there and eat a pound of wings.
No.
And so their appetite is diminished. So if you're taking a handful of pills, there goes your room for breakfast.
There's no more room. There's nothing.
That's a really interesting point.
I'm very cognizant of that constantly, because when you think about an octogenarian, a centenarian, we do have centenarians now. I mean, there are many of them. And by 2032, the population of 65 and over will double. So we think in those terms, how are we going to face this malnutrition issue if we don't start now? So, and also if we're moving to, if we're talking about protein calorie malnutrition now, we're talking malnutrition that comes from protein. When we're talking protein calorie malnutrition in the elderly, we're talking 30 to 60% of our elderly are protein calorie malnutrition. They don't consume enough protein to fight infection, to maintain healing, to regenerate cells, so it puts them at risk for so many things. So that number actually just got the chills, because
that is shocking to me.
Yeah.
And you know what? Like, where were you when my mom was alive? Light bulb went on. There was, trying to get her to eat the proteins was a struggle.
Right.
And especially
the reason why, because
age.
it stays in the body so much longer, the gastric emptying and the work. somebody with CHF and COPD to break down the tissue of a protein substance is so much work. It is so much work. They can't even handle it. So that's why these protein supplements, maybe even moving to a plant-based diet, like the quinoa, something with a lot, or beans, something with a lot of protein that's a little bit easier to digest than steak or chicken or pork. You know, using the information that we have to kind of trick our bodies into, maybe instead of a ground beef hamburger, feeding somebody who's elderly a black bean and quinoa hamburger. It's 14 grams of protein and easier to digest. Looks a little different, tastes a little bit different, but it's easier to digest and they may be able to consume it. You know, so I constantly try these things with my patients. When I was in hospice and home care as well, nutrition was huge. Nutrition was the difference. I mean, you're at increased risk of falls because of dizziness, hypoglycemia, hyperglycemia.
Absolutely.
It was a big combat. It was a big, big difference. Timing of medications. Some medications you have to take on an empty stomach. So discharging.
And it's a battle.
It's tremendous.
Manage just the medication management and diet. You know,
Right.
Like you said, this one's got to be empty stomach. This one's got to have full stomach. This one says take with milk. This one says don't take with grapefruit. You know,
Right.
If you look at all those little stickers on the bottles.
Absolutely. And so that's where you get into trouble when people live at home, because who's helping them? Who's watching them? You know, and so to have this program is miraculous. It's something that we've needed for a really long time. And I am
Absolutely.
so completely grateful because,
Absolutely.
you know,
And it's amazing that they saw the need and they recognize it and they're filling it. And
they
that's,
mobilize. I mean, it's all about
just amazing. And, you know, kudos to Fulfill. We're going to be talking about the program. We educated 14 people last night, and we're going to keep talking about it and keep educating them. And, you know, if you're one of our professional partners, Beth and I are going to be coming back for you because we're going to do it again. We got, you know, everybody wanted to do it again, so we'll be doing it again. And we'll be learning more about the other programs that the food bank has to support the community. And we're going to be supporting them 100% as well. So keep your eyes and ears open for that, because, you know, Beth and I are two women on a mission.
It's something that this is fixable. This is something we can do something about. And I always say, leave the world a better place than you found it. Our little corner of the world, we can make a difference. We really can, you know.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
we made a difference last night. You know, those 504 meals that we packed, that was 504 bags we made. And that could feed up to 4 people for 2 days. So that was, you know, exponentially, those are much bigger numbers. And we had a great time doing it together. And
Absolutely.
I think at one point we all got a little bit quiet, and that thankfulness hit us like, wow, never for the grace of God. Like, you know, how lucky are we, and how wonderful it is that we're able to do something about it, because we are.
Absolutely. That it hit most people, I think, you know, when I escorted a couple of groups back to where we were, and they just walked through, and we followed the yellow path, and it was just, and they just went, wow, like the enormity of the facility and the need and the stacks and stacks and stacks of donations. And that just, everybody was kind of quiet and sobered up. By the time they got back there, they were just like, the jaws had dropped, and they were just like, wow.
Yeah. I mean, it's mostly, you know, you think about, I mean, look at the two extremes in the population that were so needy, the children and the elderly. Now, if our children aren't properly nourished, if our children don't have the cholesterol and the protein that they need, how are they possibly going to learn? How could you concentrate? We've all done it. We run around all day as marketers, as professional women, run around all day. Sometimes we don't eat lunch, we skip breakfast, or we this, and we're hungry, and we're not really right. You know, we're not thinking clearly. We're grumpy, maybe. But imagine this poor little child. You know, it caused, you know, it's just, I can't even imagine. It definitely keeps me up at night. But our children and our elderly, the two groups at the opposite end of the spectrum where nutrition is the most important. I mean, same thing. If the elderly are at risk for infection due to malnutrition, then so are our children. And if our children are at risk of infection and they're going to school and they're around each other, what are we doing? How do we even begin? And that's who we're depending on for our future. We have to do better. We have to do better for them.
And we have to do better for the generation that came before us and take care of our elders.
Absolutely. So at both ends of the spectrum, we are in the sandwich. We're in the middle, and we have to take care of both ends.
Yep.
And something like Fulfill makes it possible. This is really something we can do something about. There's not much in this world that you can do something about outside of your own home, but this is something that we can all do together. And you saw, I mean, bin after bin after bin of home donation. Beautiful. I mean, and what touched me also was the generosity. Generosity is the most beautiful, human trait, and to see that it really still exists is comforting, because sometimes this world could be unkind, and to see the kindness and the generosity, humbling, very humbling.
Absolutely. And on that note, we're going to wrap up the Friday finish. I know we could talk about nutrition and what we saw last night forever, but thank you so much for coming on and talking about the experience we shared last night and the importance of nutrition. And I'm sure we will revisit this topic again and again, since it is so essential for everything, healing, health, and well-being.
Yes.
So thank you so much, Beth, and have a great weekend, and happy Friday.
Happy Friday. Have a great one.